Okay, and so this video, and this starts with the rest of the actual functions or processes done by the digestive system. So we've covered the mechanical and physical digestion and the propulsion. So here's the chemical digestion, which then allows you to absorb. And of course, defecation is just the result of anything that couldn't come in or wouldn't come in. So chemical digestion, again, what you're going to see is a number of secretions throughout by the mucosal cells, the epithelial cells that line the lumen, the tract. And this is where we're going to take apart the molecules. All right, so we call this process and have from the very start, AMP1, hydrolysis. And so hydrolysis, degradation, decomposition will happen because of enzymes produced by the structures along the tract, as well as some acids and salts. So this kind of gives you, again, this is a lovely cartoon to give you the overview of all the processes together. So again, really nice to have in front of you to think about what are we supposed to get done here. All right, and then, like I said, they color code this to go with these boxes. So then absorption is when we finally, pick this up, and you'll notice the absorption they have shown here appropriately, all the small intestine. Okay, so the big payoff, small intestine to the blood or lymph. So inside the small intestine, you can see all these structures called villi, and in the middle of the villi will be just massive capillary beds and lymphatic capillaries. All right, and then defecation, that's just whatever we couldn't use, and that'll happen. It's something that couldn't be absorbed, wouldn't be absorbed, and just stays throughout the tract from the beginning to the end. Sometimes this is things, again, that can be secreted from the body, like the bile, right? But it's mostly stuff that just didn't enter. So we have to regulate all this, and that's our common theme, right? Is we want to make sure that everything happens according to when it should happen and how it should happen. So one more time, like it'll always be, there'll be some neural influence and some chemical or hormonal influence on these processes we just covered. So for the neural aspects, we have sensors. That's always true throughout. So receptors, right? Chemoreceptors, chemoreceptors. Pause those. Okay, so mechanoreceptors, chemoreceptors, and osmoreceptors. So concentrations, specific chemicals, and then mostly stretch here from mechanoreceptors. So here I say, here's what sensors detect. As I mentioned here, presence of food leads to expansion. As soon as there's something in the tract itself is stretched, and that sets up a sensory aspect sent to the brain. How much a chemical is broken down or how much chemical breakdown has occurred, well, the chemoreceptors can do that because remember, the job of the tract is to chemically break apart these molecules that you eat. And then the presence of food and liquids, that also can do some stretch and some concentration here for osmoreceptors, and the type of nutrients. So here's what these sensors detect, all right, which is appropriate because this will help the sensors then can direct what the tissues and cells and structures should be doing. So the responses to all this sensory is usually they're reflexes, so they don't achieve awareness for the most part. You don't know what's happening in your stomach or your small intestines, or really most of your large intestines. So these are reflexes, involuntary, and they will consist of secretions, right? So some of your responses will be to dump enzymes and dump acids and dump salts and ions into the tube. Some of the response will be move it, right? Move it further along, move it back and forth. It just depends. Your hormonal regulations consist of these three. These are the three big players: gastrin, secretin, and cholecystokinin. All right. So gastrin, anything with gastric in it, is referring to the stomach, and so it is named for that and is very appropriate. So gastrin, this compound made by cells in the stomach, is secreted in response to food. So those sensors we mentioned about in the previous slide are going to detect that there's food in the stomach and that there's a pH problem too. You're going to figure out. And the response to the problem is gastrin. And gastrin directs, right? So response is secrete gastric acid. secretin, which is done by the Alice. Secretin, which is produced by the duodenum, and cholecystokinin by the duodenum, so these are part of the small intestine, will be when food reaches the small intestine, and they're going to help too, again, direct and modify the whole process, many of the processes. So I say secretin is secreted in response to food and acid, so this is a big deal. And what they will result in, secretin will cause bicarbonate to be made by the pancreas. So the target is actually a pancreas. Bicarbonate, which is HCO3 with one negative charge on it. Bicarbonate is very good for neutralizing the acids from the stomach, because of course the duodenum is the next place after the stomach. Cholecystokinin is secreted in response to food in the small intestine, and in general what it does is it causes enzymes to be made, and again, target is a pancreas, just like secretin, and the pancreas then makes enzymes when cholecystokinin tells it to. Cholecystokinin also tells the liver to produce bile, and it tells the gallbladder to release bile, right? And cholecystokinin will cause this gastric inhibitory peptide to be made, and that slows gastric movements and secretion. So basically, think of it this way: cholecystokinin is released as food is starting to enter into the small intestine, and it's basically going to prepare the small intestine for the arrival of the food, as well as slow down the transit of the food from the stomach into the small intestines. All right, so now that we have the background, or the background details and the foundation for understanding, now we're going to follow everything through the digestive tract. So we put here the mouth, pharynx, and esophagus, and these are basically mechanical, physical digestion, little tiny bit of chemical, and lots of propulsion. So this is, of course, the upper aspects of the upper alimentary canal, that is above the diaphragm. And the accessories to this, of course, are the tongue, salivary glands, and teeth. So in the oral cavity, right, all your teeth, 32 adult teeth, help you with this process of mastication, that and the tongue as well. So you take food in, that's what the term ingestion means, and you break it down into smaller and smaller pieces. You mix it with the secretions from the other accessories, salivary glands, and you propel it along. So into the pharynx and down through the esophagus. So I say here, it's mostly mechanical digestion and a little bit of chemical. And the chemical is going to come from the salivary glands. So the whole cavity is lined for protection, stratified squamous epithelium. Alright, the tongue shown here in a very simple cartoon. Of course, we have our tonsils here because the oral entry is a likely entry for contamination. And I mentioned that there's a few things to note here, right? And you've gotten before. So here's our lingual tonsils and our palatine tonsils, and we have taste buds that we talked about in AMP1 because in different types of papillae on the tongue, and some touch receptors here again for the tactile sensation. You have defense here with the lingual tonsils. You assist with the mechanical digestion, gripping food and mixing it with saliva, forming what we call the bolus, is a semi-solid food mass. And from the tongue, we initiate swallowing. Chemical digestion from the tongue, there's a lingual lipase, but it doesn't work until we get into the stomach and the stomach's environment. All right, salivary glands are very important here. There's 3 sets of these we look at in lab: parotids and submandibular and sublingual. And so saliva will clean, it'll dissolve your food chemicals so that you can taste with those taste buds in the papillae. It again moistens the food for easier swallowing, less damage as it's moved, and it begins the chemical digestion of carbohydrates. So there are exocrine glands, as I mentioned previously. Here's the ducts for these. And the parotid has Stenson's duct coming into it. You can see this easily in the lab. The submandibular, right down here, opens at the base of the lingual frenulum, and it has Wharton's duct, which is usually pretty easy to see as well. And then the sublingual, which are just beneath the tongue, have a number of little ducts here, known as a rindinules, right? And then there's many, many small glands scattered throughout. Like there's labial with the lips, and the buccal, and the palatal, and the lingual. So it's kind of, again, these are the 3 major ones, and then there's a lot of tiny ones that assist. All right, so saliva is what is produced by these glands. It's of course mostly water, because we said it moistens and puts and dissolves food, or allows it to go into solution. Saliva is very close to neutral. It has a number of different ions in it, but I really highlight the bicarbonate, which helps to keep it neutral. And a lot of what we eat are acids, so this helps to buffer. There are several larger molecules in saliva, so sugary proteins, glycoproteins, and enzymes. And enzymes for us are all proteins. So we see sugary protein mucus, lysozyme, which destroys the cell wall of bacteria. Here is some antibodies, a secretory class, IgA, defensins, which neutrophils have as well, right? And this punches holes in the membranes of cells. Epidermal growth factor. So yes, like your dog, if you lick your wounds, you actually stimulate some of the repair. And then this very appropriate enzyme, ASE is the ending here, amylase. And amylase is going to help us with the chemical breakdown of carbohydrates. And this would be the long chain starches, long chain carbohydrates. I mentioned here that the glands are a little bit different, and you see this on your slides in lab. You won't have to know that for me in any way, shape, or form, but just to notice that, and they have a slight difference. Two types of cells found in these glands. Serous cells are the cells that produce the enzymes, and they contain, make a lot of these things up here. And then the mucus cells, which tend to be lighter staining, they make mucus which helps lubricate the food mass and makes everything stick together, basically, as it moves on. Right? Salivation is controlled, right? So this is a reflex. You have a salivatory reflex, and swallowing is a reflex, and vomiting is a reflex, and all these, functions that are processes you probably hadn't thought about before. But that's just it. You hadn't thought about them before, and that's why they're reflexes. Okay. So you actually produce about 1.5 liters of saliva a day. Most of it is swallowed, so you don't realize that. Only when it's really excessive do you start drooling, which you might be doing right now, because even talking about saliva is something that will stimulate saliva. All right. It is controlled by the autonomic nervous system. Again, parasympathetic, rest and digest. Sympathetic inhibits. So here, parasympathetic stimulates all that watery, enzyme-rich saliva that is very good for the digestive process. Sympathetic actually increases the mucus formation and decreases the digestive function. So you get a dry mouth when you have a sympathetic response. Okay, just so you know. All right. Chemoreceptors and mechanoreceptors are the sensors here. So anything that's of acidic nature, low pH, would cause salivation. And anything at all put in the mouth, any touch, stretch, you name it, send signals to the brainstem, right, where we have the salivary center, to begin the production that then sends back and tells the salivary glands to start making saliva. And I mentioned, sight, smell, thought of food can all influence this. We're all Pavlovian in nature, right? So the teeth for mechanical digestion, which we call, chewing is called mastication. Here lays out the entire set of your, deciduous teeth or milk teeth, and which deciduous temporary, and then the adult teeth. 20 for your baby teeth and 32 for your adult. I'm not going to ask you about each one of those. We have a model that shows what teeth look like in general. All right. So enamel, very hard outer substance, dentin, softer within. So the crown is what's above the gum. Then roots, when you think about a root canal, that's what they're talking about. They're going in and modifying this so that you won't have any more pain or really not much of a tooth left at all anyway. But again, I'm not really interested in trying to get you guys to tell me all about teeth. So this is really more for your information, public service. All right, pharynx participates in both digestive system and respiration. And so they've nicely color-coded this to show you the parts, right? So the pharynx is shown all here in purple, and versus the larynx for respiratory, and the nasal cavity really for respiratory. And oral leading into this. So both the nasal and the oral open up to the pharynx. And then the choice is made for air down the trachea and food and liquids down the esophagus. So the pharynx is skeletal muscle and lined with stratified squamous epithelium. And it connects this all together. We'll pick up on the next video to talk about the rest of the tubing.